This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We are hot and heavy, dog days of summer, but basketball is completely what's happening right now. I mean, you've got the USA men's and women's basketball teams representing in the 2024 Olympics, the 3-on-3 teams as well, too. You got a lot of things still happening in the offseason, and even when the Olympics is said and done, we are running right back into the continuation of the WNBA season. By that time frame, the U.S. men's basketball team will all respectively go back to their fellow teams, and the NBA will be getting ready to kind of amp up a little bit as well, too. We'll be like right in the digs of close to camp happening and things of that nature. And then, oh, by the way, if people hadn't been paying attention, the NBA struck up a nice little deal with Discovery and Amazon to basically move the NBA, a major deal worth over $74 billion worth for the NBA to be displayed on all of the major streaming devices handled by Warner Brothers and Discovery, and also with Amazon. So 2025-26, we're definitely going to be seeing a new look to the NBA. So much happening. And if my people are watching this on YouTube, clearly so much change going on. Even my man Shaw had to trim it down a little bit, man. So, you know.
Wow. Well, definitely.
My man clean cut, ready for the new year before the new year even strikes in.
Let's not go that far, brother. I definitely miss my little facial hair, brother. But we will definitely hope we growing that back in, sooner than later. But all for a good cause, and for some conversation we had off air, man. But
it's ironic, man. Our show is supposed to have a They Reminisce segment, and I might have to do that. You know what I'm saying? For the facial hair that's no longer there for you, brother.
Well, trust me, I already did it, man. I shed a tear, as did my wife, because she does not like me clean shaven at all. But such is life, man. Like I said, all for some exciting things from the personal side too that I got to.
Yeah, man, absolutely, man. So as always, man, we appreciate everybody hopping on board with us this week. Got a lot to get into. We'll be talking about Olympic basketball. We have a They Reminisce segment, which I know that we don't get the opportunity to do too often, but I think this is a good one. And then we also got some news and notes happening to the association. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw, Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle, NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. You can go to www.thebaselinenba.com to check out not just this episode, but all of the episodes that we have loaded up in the archive. And if you catch us on the YouTube channel, you can catch us on 19 Media Group. So go to www.19mediagroup.com. 19 Media Group be running these content streets. So if you want to catch us and the family of great content creators, be sure to go there and check that out as well, too. So, Shaw, let's get right into things. A lot of the focus and attention has been on the men's and women's basketball representing in the 2024 Olympics. It's ironic that we're at this stage when we talk about basketball. There was a lot of fervor and a lot of hype, maybe some 10, 20 years ago, about the look and the feel of when the basketball teams respectively come out on the court, and what kind of intensity, what approach that they will bring, I think kind of determined the level of excitement that people really have. But I think a lot of that has changed. I think in recent years, the focus has been on gymnastics. The focus has been on swimming. The focus has even been, in many respects, a revival, so to speak, with the men's and women's track and field, right? And that's great. Ultimately, though, what a lot of people still talk about is where is men and women on the global scale, and at this time of the year when it comes to the Olympics, when it comes to basketball. I just want to get your take, Shaw, on what we've seen thus far from the basketball men's and women's side, respectively. Obviously, a lot of quote-unquote attention has been paid to on the 3x3, right, with the men's and women's respectively losing their exhibition rounds, but their round-robin games, right, and ultimately have to play themselves into the tournament, so to speak. So where are you with the fever when it comes to basketball, Olympic-wise, with the men's and women's?
Yeah, I think we talked about it going into it, that we would probably both pick back up, in terms of the interest. Wasn't so interested in terms of the men's, their exhibition games and how they were looking mortal, I guess, to say that to the very least, for some people's proverbial expectations. The 3-on-3 thing I think has been interesting. I'm not paying as close attention to that as I think maybe some others are, but obviously the men's and women's on the 5-on-5 definitely kind of tuned into what's going on there too, and they represent it as we would have expected. There's some drama going on with the men's side, but it doesn't really matter since they're winning. I think maybe I'm a little biased here, but there's just been an unnecessary amount of slander. I think, throwing Jason Tatum's way and the way Steve Kerr treated him, especially in that first opening round game of the official Olympics. So there's been a lot of just weirdness around the Celtics and people trying to seemingly continue to throw some dirt on their name here. But it doesn't matter, right? From the Olympic side, they're 3-0. They've gotten the job done. Kevin Durant came back, looked amazing, especially in that first game that he was back, and they've been able to figure some stuff out. Kerr, I think, continues to be different, in terms of his coaching, but it doesn't matter when you have that much talent. And so for that lens, it's working out well. And then the women's side, they just continue to dominate and do what they need to do. Not so much as much drama that's happening on the men's side. So that's my my short version of the take there too. Excited that USA is doing what they're doing, especially on the 5-on-5. We'll see how it goes now here as we get into the medal round.
Isn't it funny how I think Steve Kerr is the kind of person who intentionally, unintentionally injects himself into the conversations of what the eyes need to be fixated on when it comes to the NBA. So I say that not because I'm trying to diss him. I'm saying that because I don't know if whether or not there's a whole lot left to say, right? Like, back when it was the dream team, back when it was the redeem team and all of that, it was really about the players. But I do think that now we're beginning to see how important coaching really matters, especially when a lot of this is being driven by the style of how the NBA is being played, by the way that a lot of the players are playing, and by the way that the NBA trends how that game of play is being put out there. Because it's definitely not the way that we see things when we're paying attention to the Olympics. And I want to caution people very carefully that while a lot of, the pundits are out there, berating and chastising Steve Kerr, who I think is doing an adequate job, I don't think it nearly should be as difficult as I think the media strenuously looks at. You have an NBA champion. Why is he not getting more playing time? This, that, and the third. A lot of this was policed by the players. You knew who the alphas were, right? And nobody questioned Jordan. Nobody questioned Johnson. Nobody questioned Bird. Everybody all fell in line with the way that they wanted to see this thing play out, with the way the whole outcome was about winning the gold medal. I don't know if whether or not that's the style that we're seeing from this particular version of the men's Olympic team, which I think is what's lending a lot of the stuff kind of bubbling up. Because even when you had Chuck Daly coaching, you know what I'm saying? He didn't have to say anything, but it resonated, right? It's like the loudest voice in the room was the person who said nothing, because everything was kind of put out by the way that they went out and performed. And you can clearly see that Steve Kerr is still trying to figure out how to be a voice, but still allow the players to speak to this, because for some reason we still want to reminisce about how things were handled back when it was the dream team and the redeem team and such a forth. And you are clearly seeing the characteristic distinctions of how a team is being ran by a Steph Curry, by a LeBron James, maybe even some degree of Kevin Durant. You know what I mean? So it's kind of interesting the way people are kind of going off on these tangents. I'm like, I could clearly recall we had about as talented a basketball team some 30-something years ago, 40-something years ago with what we were doing. And we didn't have to make a big deal about it if they were going out there and still beating teams and blowing them out. But because Jason Tatum is fresh off of winning an NBA championship, and everybody thrusts him into this top 5 conversation of being one of the best players on the court, we're suddenly questioning a coach and a team's, objective in winning a gold medal, saying we're not going to play him in this particular game. And we have to go up in arms about it and stuff like that. And it's just weird to me, because if it's all about winning a gold medal, I could give a damn about who is out there. What I give a damn about is the people who are out there are doing what they're supposed to do so they can win the gold medal. So again, it's very interesting because again, I take nothing away from why people should feel some kind of way about it, but I do feel some kind of way about it because I feel like, again, we're usurping the idea that Jason Tatum is the face of, say, the Boston Celtics, because we want to make him the face of the Boston Celtics. But is he actually the face of the USA men's basketball team? I don't think he ever earned that aspect of it,
Right.
especially if everything is still about Steph Curry and LeBron James and Kevin Durant, who injected himself into this conversation by arguably saying, I am the most versatile player. I am the mercenary that the USA men's basketball team needs, because when this team goes through the struggles that it goes through, I'm the guy out there, whether you start me or you have me coming off the bench, that go get you buckets.
Yeah, I'm with all of that. See, it's just, and it's not to relate it because Tatum has started the last 2 games and it's more or less been fine. Embiid sat the next game after Tatum's came back. Tatum was inserted into the starting lineup. I think Kerr was in some ways, I don't know, trying to maybe overcoach a little bit. And from the outrage from the Tatum side was just like, well, hey, yeah.
When have we never seen that about Steve Kerr, right?
Well, but the thing with Tatum is like he's coming off of what he's coming off of. And in that regard, there was no communication leading up to it. So I think that's where it was just a shy was like, he couldn't get 5 minutes in this game. And it wasn't like, yeah, he does have a lot riding on, coming off the championship and being the face of NBA 2K and all that. So the lack of communication was there. Then I felt like benching Embiid the next game was a save face type mood, because the only person who seems to be seemingly out of rotation regularly is Halliburton. And Halliburton seems to be okay with that, deferring to all these other guys to some degree. Tatum didn't know that was coming. And that's where I think Kerr lost the locker room, I think, briefly, or lost Tatum briefly, but all is well. They are winning and winning convincingly. Yes, they've gotten out to some slower starts, but usually by second quarter, they kick things into gear and then they've been able to finish strong. So
the
we'll see what
USA
happens here in these medal rounds here moving forward.
So is the USA women's basketball team. They've gotten off slow starts as well, too. You know what I'm saying? So it's just, again, where I am with this, and maybe I'm just, curmudgeon and old in my ways or whatever the case may be. My problem is, we're not operating in the same kind of space of how this team got constructed and what identity this team truly needs to be. Like, I truly believe that a lot of these guys are coming in with a different mentality, a different approach to what they're asking to get out of this experience of being a part of the USA men's basketball team. And I know holistically it's all about winning gold, but I do think that sometimes what gets conflated is what's driving the narrative. If you're talking about the media pushing this because of all of the storylines that they want to kind of develop and envelop with this, that's not helpful, right? Because that was what was never about. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why I'm just saying it's very interesting to me that all the people that are shouting out in a room off the rooftops, I don't think would have been having any kind of problem or question if it came out of the mouths of Steph Curry and LeBron James as to saying why Jason Tatum wasn't playing this game or why Joel Embiid wasn't playing this game. But because it's Steve Kerr, who is one of the most mild-mannered, I mean, even when Steve Kerr blows a fuse, you have to wonder, was that manufactured? Or is that him genuinely being pissed off about certain things? And it's not to question him as a person. It's just that's been his MO, and it's worked. But again, we're talking about going out and doing something that should come naturally to people's perception when we talk about USA basketball, that they should go out and just beat everyone's ass every time they go out on the basketball court. And that's just not necessarily the case because we're not operating in that same space in this day and age. If they go out and dominate, it's truly because this team collectively is on one and they understand the magnitude of the moment, and they have proven that collectively together, no one in the world can match up when these guys are all on the same page doing what they do and doing it best. And I think that's going to be the biggest struggle more than anything. And then you have a coach who has to read that in the room and then have to make adjustments accordingly so that it doesn't have us questioning this after the games are said and done.
Yeah, well, again, they're fine. They really are. And as I said, the stress and the drama around it is somewhat manufactured because, well, we need a storyline. It's the summer, and this team is playing relatively well. So the middle rounds will be interesting. They end up on opposite sides of the bracket, which will be their toughest competition in Canada. So it would probably be in a gold medal game if they would meet that team. Yeah, and that's something I think everybody's looking forward to. So their job is clearly not done. They've looked really good doing it so far, despite the little hiccups here and there. And I wouldn't say everyone is playing at the top of their level. Curry's not shooting well, and I think Embiid has looked, disinterested at time, but now getting into a little bit more that the crowd is, consistently, on his ass, for not playing for France in general. And I think has looked good. We've seen some flashes from Bam Adebayo, but there's all types of guys on this team who can dominate for long stretches if need be. And, that's why the minutes are going to be even keel. And I think nobody's averaging more than 16, right now, which is, again, and it's a 40-minute game. So Steve Kerr has all the weaponry, at his disposal. And they can deploy, all kind of nuclear bombs at any given time. Like there's nobody, he looks down the side of that bench line and is like, oh, I'm worried about that guy going in. Everybody can contribute in a way that's going to get this USA gold.
You brought up a great point. I mean, he has figured out a way to keep these guys relatively healthy. And I think he is still looking at this where this is going to be, again, a matchup situation. This is going to be a matchup thing. Let's not get it twisted. I was watching the Canadian team, and this is a different dynamic because just how much shooting has been implemented by this American team.
Yeah,
I would have probably more preferred a more physically interior-based type of team, because I just feel like whenever the U.S. decides to go down in the paint, they are going to initiate. They're going to draw that contact. But a lot of the guys that we have on this team, that contact, they're going to always look for calls. And that's just not what's going to play. So if they're shooting and they're clicking on all cylinders from their perimeter shooting, their 3-point shooting and things of that nature, nobody's touching them. But it'll be very interesting to see how physical the USA men's basketball team can truly play when they realize that they're going to let, the leash off a little bit. Like they're not going to be as tight on the calls as what we would expect it to be, even if it's especially when they're getting closer to the medal round situation, like the knockout round and then eventually to the medal round situation, if we expect the USA men's to dominate the way that we do. So like, to me, I would be very interested to see how all of that stuff plays out. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we got some news and notes stuff going on, and we got a nice little They Reminisce over you. And man, we got a player for you. I'm sure if we got to pull this one out of the archives, you're going to be like, what? So definitely want to stay tuned for that. But first, are you ready to elevate your fantasy sports experience? With Prize Picks, you can win up to 100 times your money. Imagine turning a $10 entry into a whopping $1,000. The summer is full of sports, and there's no better time to get in on the action. If you're looking for promotions, Prize Picks has got you covered every week, from lowering select players and stats projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Women's basketball is heating up, especially with the Olympics, with stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make their names for themselves along greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You could win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Prize Picks is the best way to mix and match your selections across sports. Sean and I grew up playing baseball, so we love to mix in a little variety with our picks with America's pastime. And for those of you who love a quick win, Prize Picks is the way to go. You can make your picks and submit your entry in less than 60 seconds. Plus, with quick withdrawals and an enormous selection of players and stat types, it's no wonder Prize Picks is the go-to app for fantasy sports. So what are you waiting for? Download the Prize Picks app today and use promo code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's right. Prize Picks will match your deposit, giving you more to play with. Remember, with Prize Picks, it's as simple as picking more or picking less. So let's get those entries in and watch the winnings roll. It's that easy. Don't forget to use promo code CLNS to deposit till you get your deposit match, and stay tuned for more basketball insights right here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Let's play and win together with Prize Picks. More Baseline, Callie. Don't go away. All right, we are back. Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. Let's get some news and notes happening in association. Shaw, the Phoenix Suns have acquired Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones, adding a little bit more depth to the Phoenix Suns. How are we feeling about this move?
Great move for the price. I think he's getting 3 million, 3.3. Gets to build his credibility and re-enter free agency next year, maybe even with Phoenix. But they're always going to be a little bit cap strapped as it is, anyhow. But I love this move for them. And the timing of it, he could have gone other places and probably gotten a little bit more money. I know a lot of the money has dried up, but Phoenix needs a point guard. And Tyus Jones is one of the better ones out there. So great move for Matt Ishbia and James Jones and company, man. This is a super signing for that money. It's
a great move. I'm more so looking at this as to what can Tyus Jones do with this opportunity with the Phoenix Suns. I just feel like his career, has kind of, don't want to say tanked, but it's definitely dipped over the last few years, and he's, you know, kind of like falling off the grid. So this will be a great opportunity to really show that, you know, he was what we thought he was, you know, highly touted, you know, when he was playing with Minnesota, Memphis, respectively. I would love to see him resurrect that part of it, because I do think he's a true guard in this game. But, you know, now he's going to be playing next to some ballers, right? With Beal, you know, Durant and Booker. So we'll see, you know, how that plays out. I just hope that he implements that part of the game that we, you know, lauded and applauded, you know, for him, because they're definitely going to need that. But more importantly, I think I want to see it more for him than more than anything else. Jarrett Allen, 3-year, $91 million extension, the Cleveland Cavaliers. Everything seems to be rounding into form that they want to run this back. Does that still mean that Darius Garland is still going to be a part of that whole scenario?
Well, they've been throwing some cold water on that. I think Garland spoke at Summer League towards the end of it, saying, hey, all these narratives have been put out there about me are incorrect. You know, happy to go back to Cleveland. I don't know if that's brave face and just, you know, trying to be a good soldier for the cause. But everything seems to be trending in that direction. So I might stand corrected, but you know, we are still a couple months away, and we'll see if that's where he ultimately ends up returning back to Cleveland, because I don't know the exact situation for Darius Garland right now. But this at this point is about Jarrett Allen and, you know, their recommitment to him, and that double big lineup. So with Mobley getting his extension, Donovan Mitchell getting his extension, and Allen now getting one as well too. Allen's secured for the next 5 years. Not to say that none of those guys will never be tradable, but it does signal to me that this is really the core of what they're trying to do. Garland, I think, will ultimately be the odd man out, but I don't know that it'll be right before this season starts, given the way that things have been going and trending so far over the course of the summer.
Love this for Jarrett Allen, because he's getting his bag, right? I don't know if I love this for the Cleveland Cavaliers, because it still just does not address the elephant in the room. So, you know, look, this is a good team. I don't know if this is going to be a good enough team unless somebody takes that next step up, and it's either Mobley or Mitchell.
It's right. Mobley. It's Mobley. Mitchell is at the height of his superpowers. There's not a lot more Mitchell can do at this point. Mobley has much more growth to potentially had, but you wonder if Allen being there is going to stunt that, you know, unless Mobley starts to develop that outside game.
Again, listen, they're changing everything except acknowledging, you know, the what's really staring them in their face. And I'm not saying you have to overhaul a team, but clearly they're picking and choosing what they're willing to keep and not keep. I mean, clearly you've moved on from JB, right? And now this means that whoever now is coming in is going to have to implement a new style of basketball, in which the combination right now secured, if Garland stays on this team, is figuring out how Garland can really help this team maintain this level of elevation. And to your point, where you find that opportunity of consistent high level play from Evan Mobley to maintain present, right? Like, forget all the injuries and stuff. I'm just curious, where is he going to really truly find his way? Because if not, then you really are putting this on the shoulders of Spider Mitchell. And to that, I say, to your point, Shaw, is if we think that we've seen him at the peak of the powers, then that means that trade that they made in order to bring him into this fold was a waste, right? Because it clearly is not coming to fruition for all of them collectively. So something is going to have to give. Again, happy for Jarrett, got his bag. He's definitely a stable, mainstay type of player, and hopefully he'll continue to succeed playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers in this style of offense that's now going to be newly implemented next to an up and rising star in Mobley. We'll see what happens, but man, I'm telling you, it feels like the Cleveland Cavaliers may have kind of like are stuck in neutral, like they're stuck in the mud, so to speak, even with these particular signings, with no hope unless something shakes by the end with this situation with Garland. That's what I feel like.
Well, I'm going to say this last thing. A lot of teams feel like when they bring a new coach in, that's the lifeblood. That's the change that needs to happen. So re-upping with these guys and bringing a new coach in tow, you wonder now if the Cavs feel like, hey, there is more ceiling for them than we may see, I think, from the outside looking in. So let's watch that to see what the development looks like, especially going into training camp, you know, how their offense, how's their defense changing, and, you know, and give this organization, you know, some runway here, even though we seem to be dubious at best.
All right, Shaw. Gordon Hayward has decided to hang up the Jordans. the kicks, 14 years into the of the league. He's deciding, you know what, I'm good with what I've done, what I've accomplished. So he says goodbye. What do we make of the Gordon Hayward experience in the NBA?
Uh, the Utah days were really something else. He was a really good basketball player, and I think was probably never right after that first game, regular season game after signing in Boston, and then was fighting, I think, for his place to kind of get back to the player he was in Utah. Had some stints where he did play well. Was on a very good Boston Celtics team, when he did come back in the bubble, but got injured again, moved on, went to Charlotte, got a bag there. Had stints there too, 5, 10, even 15 games at times, but ultimately always had an injury to overcome. And I think at some point he just got tired of having to deal with that. He seemed to have lost the love, even though he was saying all the right things. That wasn't translating, I think, in his play on the court. And this last situation, OKC, that probably was the sobering moment for him. And so while I'm sounding very kind of monotone and, resolute, in this, but I think he's happy with the decision. He's going to go on and do some stuff in the media space and independent filmmaking. And he's very much a dad and a family guy. So it allows him to really kind of dip that into that side of his life. And, for whatever the second stage of his career is going to look like. But from the basketball lens, he was a really good basketball player and somebody, ironically, we will reminisce on, I think, at some point as well, too, maybe 5 years from now, the NBA Baseline podcast still rocking and rolling. A career, we'll look fondly upon those Utah days, man, when he was an all-star, and a really, really good basketball player.
Yeah, I was hoping maybe that, Gordon hung around a little bit, longer than how long we'll be doing our podcast. Look, I think the straw that broke the camel's back is his experience with OKC. And it's just weird to me, like the way everything kind of played out. I find it so difficult that Daigneault could not find a way to really find a space for him to help contribute for OKC. One thing I did notice, and maybe, I might be, seeing more than what is probably there, maybe making more of it than what's probably there. I think there was a level of ego in Gordon Hayward, one where I just don't think he saw himself being that guy hanging around 2-3 years or bouncing around with certain teams, being quote unquote that veteran presence. You know how I am about this whole thing with the veteran presence thing. Yeah. I think that once he began to kind of read the room, and this was never about what he can really give you on the basketball court, more so what he can do kind of behind, in the locker rooms and, preparation for game night and things of that nature. I think he just realized, he said, nah, this is just not me. Like, I could be doing other things and feeling like I'm fulfilling more of what I want to do, not having to be out there on the basketball court and just kind of just taking up space. And I respect a person for that, because in order for you to really truly know where you're going to be, you got to be true to who you are as you're going through it. So, some guys are defiant, stay in the league way longer than necessary. They take spots and roster spots for like absolutely no reason, maybe because the organization or the, whoever is signing the player still sees something there, or maybe their agent really sold them on the idea that they can give you something that clearly they're just not, they're not mentally in that space to want to do if it's not set up in the way that they want to. And I'm sure one day Gordon will probably speak to it, but I agree with you, man. His days during Utah made me want him to be a Boston Celtic. I thought that, listen, this trajectory that we see for the Boston Celtics, this happens because of what the Celtics did, giving Brad Stevens his guy, right? Yeah. The relationship that him and Brad Stevens had, and the way that the Celtics, man, you got to give the Celtics some credit. I know people don't like the Celtics. If you're a Celtics fan, you're a Celtics fan. And if you're not, you hate the Celtics. I get that. But when it comes to players who have suffered severe injuries, who have suffered medical situations, and we can go through the scrolls of them, the Celtics have figured out a way to take care of their own. And that's something that doesn't typically happen with all of the rest of the teams that are out there in the NBA, with the way that, leadership is handled and things of that nature. The Celtics took care of Gordon Hayward in such a way that I think Gordon Hayward even recognized that with the way that this team was being developed and the way that Brad Stevens was moving in the direction that they were going, that he didn't have, he wasn't going to be looked at being the same kind of player that he was being signed on to originally. And he sacrificed that aspect of it as best as he could to contribute and help this team. And they had some opportunity. There was moments there where they certainly could have seen themselves playing in the NBA finals with the young Tatum and Brown and things of that nature, but it just never happened, never came to be that way. But I give, credit to Gordon Hayward, man. That guy he produced. He was like really the lone star thing hanging on for the Utah Jazz in that intermittent period after the Darren, Williams days and transitioning to Spider. He kept it. He held it down, for the Utah Jazz and made them a competitive basketball team for a number of years when it didn't look like that was going to be the case.
Yeah. Again, not much more to be said there. I think, again, that injury in that first game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, after they got Kyrie, it just changed the trajectory of what he was going to be able to do, even more so specifically in Boston. And while they rehabbed and he got back to a symbol of prominence 2 years later, then that's the bubble season. And had he not got injured in the bubble, that Boston Celtics team might have had enough to beat the Miami Heat and get on to play the Lakers in the NBA Finals in the bubble. But it didn't go that way. And he ultimately sought a contract that he thought was befitting of his skills and what he was still able to give. And I'd say there was mixed results with that. But no need to throw dirt or disparage him in any capacity. He's a proud individual, proud man who's
really successful career,
very successful individual, and we wish him nothing but success in the next stage of his life.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we got a quick little They Reminisce segment, man. You do not want to miss on the player that we are going to be reminiscing, man. I think we are going to do Pete Rock and CL Smooth proud, flanking, bringing in this dude. You know what I'm saying? Maybe bring a smile on his face if he actually listens to our podcast. More Baseline with Callie and Ward Shaw. Do not go away. All right, time now to reminisce. My man Shaw coming up with a good one, man. And you actually threw it out there on our, on our media threads. What's it like to reminisce about our man Steve Francis? You know what I mean? If people remember, man, 8 years of Steve Francis was a wild ride in the NBA. Probably one of the most physically gifted players at his position during that time frame. 8 seasons of NBA basketball, give or take, played a few seasons overseas afterwards and stuff like that. Really couldn't find his footing, after that 2007, 2008 NBA season. But when he was at the peak of his powers, man, you'd be hard pressed not to pay attention to what that kid was doing, especially as a guard for the Houston Rockets. He was a highlight reel before the Rockets, landed James Harden. You know what I mean? And people, when they saw James Harden, they were just like giddy all over, man. They was like, oh, you know what I'm saying? We got the new highlight reel, coming out there, you know what I'm saying? Just not in the same kind of way. But when Steve Francis elevated on cats, man, it was it was a highlight reel every single night, and when he was in his bag, he brought it. It was just hard to keep him in his bag on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I mean, with Steve Francis, it was never really a question of talent. It seemed to be ultimately a question of motivation. Some of the detractors that he's opened. Yeah, he's opened up about. He's had some stuff. People passed in his life. Divorced with his wife. At the time, and those things. As a young man, getting millions of dollars, it kind of it rubbed him wrong, and he wasn't able to kind of just really make everything work. Luckily, he's not destitute. Financially. But he had a 5 or 6 year stretch where it was like, oh my God, this guy was really something else, man. And as you alluded to, the athletic gifts, the dribbling, The truly the handle was special. And he can rebound and he could get out in transition. And then, you talked about him playing with Katino Mobley and even Yao Ming in those Rockets days. Like his career averages, I think, are somewhere between 18, 6, and 5. Like that's that's really, really good. You know what it is to average 18, 6, and 5? It's just that he fell off a proverbial cliff, especially after that last season, if you will, in Orlando. But man, was he really good. He was really good. And you mentioned to talk about our social media, put it out there and trying to figure out, what are player comps? Are there player comps? And somebody, our former friend from CLNS, Sean Backey, he was like, man, Francis was one of one. And I think there was a guy, Tyler McDowell, our guy from GI, he was like Dennis Smith Jr. was trending in that direction, but Dennis Smith Jr. kind of got in his own way, but had similar, I think, skill sets, was bouncy, somewhat diminutive at the same time as well. But he didn't really get to the height of Steve Francis's powers in any way, shape, or form or fashion either.
Right. So I really thought about this. So there was one person who kind of commented and said Russell Westbrook, and I would want to agree with that aspect of it, but I felt like nobody physically came into the NBA the way that Russell Westbrook did.
Yeah, that's my thing too. I told the guys like Russell was too physical, more physical than Francis, but I get where he was going with it.
I get where he was going with it. Now, I liked your comparison that you brought out there. You said Derrick Rose, and I felt like that was a much more even comparison, so to speak, because of what we had seen when Derrick Rose first came into the NBA and how Steve Francis both came into the NBA and where their skill sets were respectively for the teams that they played for, what they contributed in doing. I liken him a lot to what I'm seeing right now from Anthony Edwards. If you look at the numbers right now, Anthony Edwards has very similar numbers, except Anthony Edwards is scoring the basketball more. And listen, minus to what we were talking about earlier before about where Steve Francis was mentally, you could make the argument that these guys' trajectory is very much there. Like I said, Anthony Edwards is scoring the basketball a little bit more, and obviously he's doing it at an earlier rate than what Steve Francis is doing. But remember what Steve Francis was coming into with that Houston Rockets team and what he was bringing to the table, to me, didn't necessarily negate what you're asking of now, what you're seeing from Anthony Edwards. But you look at the way, the physicality and the way that Anthony Edwards is playing, the showmanship, everything about that reminds me a lot like of what I saw when Steve Francis came out onto the scene. And so if there's anyone right now in the current climate of the NBA that I see having a little bit of that swag and can post those numbers very similar to it would be him.
I mean, I think I can get there with you in terms of maybe style of play, but because Anna is so much taller, you know what I mean? In terms of stature than Francis, it's hard to go there. I think most people are going to all right, who's another guard who was like this? That's why I think Tyler talking about Dennis Smith Jr., I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Even me with Derrick Rose, I'm like, yeah, they're all in the same
Steve Francis shot the basketball way better than Dennis Smith Jr. That's where I kind of
again, it's not apples to apples, but play style, right? Play style at that position. It made a lot of sense to me. And again, I think Westbrook is going to be the one most people will go to because of even the athleticism Russ has been able to display for the majority part of his career. But Russ is like just physically more dominant than I think Francis was. Not that Francis was soft in any comparison. It's just, Russ was, again, he was truly a specimen, when it comes to that. And I know without a shadow of the doubt, Francis's handle is better than Russ's. There's no two ways about it. I think his handle is even better than Derrick Rose. At peak Francis times, Francis, well, he wasn't quite Kyrie. It's Kyrie Iverson, if you will, but then you have the bounce and the ability, even at times, to really step out and make threes. With a certain level of consistency. While he wasn't a prolific 3-point shooter, he made around 34%, if you will, which around league average. That's not everybody. Not all those guards can say that same thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, so, you bring up an interesting point. So let me ask you this on the defensive side of the basketball, because one of the things that I think also played a significant factor in what we would have hoped when we had Steve Francis look offensively explosive. Defensively, there were times that he just checked out. These are times that he just, if he just basically leaned on his athleticism in itself, he probably would have been a much better defender. than what he gave the Houston Rockets during the height of his powers. But I think because he knew he came in, and during that time in the NBA, it was all about elevation. It was all about the guards getting, you know what I'm saying, that respect that's there. And ironically enough, Shaw, if you really think about it, by you bringing this up, it really speaks to where the NBA has transitioned. You know, a lot of where our attention to is focused on the wing players and the front court. Where, you know, I was struggling to figure out like who right now in the current NBA has the kind of stature that is still significant or has significance in the conversation about what we would want to be doing. Then say someone like where last we spoke of was Russell Westbrook. I think the next person coming up, if we're not going to use an Anthony Edwards in this, probably would be maybe a Tyrese Maxey. You know what I mean? But to your point, Tyrese Maxey in stature still taller than Steve Franchise. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of that transition,
but yeah.
But a lot of that transition, man, those days are almost gone. Now, I don't know if we'll get back to that again, but it feels like those days are gone where we're solely looking at a point guard, shooting guard with the kind of maybe a small in stature, but physically strong since the days of a Derrick Rose, because we don't see that right now in this current NBA.
Well, I'm going to say this, you know, and it's when you talk about a sign of the times, we become very much prisoners of the moment. But as you're talking about that, and it's like we're trying to struggle to find guys, isn't John Morant probably the closest thing to Steve Francis in today's game right now?
Probably, but not as physically. I mean, his elevation, no question.
I don't know.
But the physicality, like the ability, like I'm not gonna see John Morant put guys in the spin cycle in the post, right? That's not gonna be what's expected of him. You know,
I mean,
Steve
but the
Francis,
handle, Job he's got some ball handling skills. He can cross you. He can obviously certainly yam on you. I think defensively, Ja is better than Francis was. Francis was very much a gambler because he averaged, I think 1.2, 1.4 steals, and I think his career high might have been 1.8. But he was a gambler, like he was like playing passing lanes, but he wasn't like this lockdown guy. But honestly, I think as we're having the conversation, Ja probably stands out to me a little bit more now as somebody. But my point of even bringing him up is because we're so down on Ja as a basketball society in some ways. And yes, he had the injury, and we've kind of almost forgotten about him. I know Mike Miller just came out on a podcast and saying, "Hey, I think Miller's is Ja's agent." Is like he's coming for people's necks this year, but who isn't, right? Everybody says that in the offseason. Yeah. But at the end of the day, that's interesting to me because Ja, to me, probably has the most similar game to today's standards that Steve Francis did. A guy who can score, guy who can make, obviously pass the ball, rebounds well for the guard position as well too, and is in that 6'3" to 6'5" range. Ja Morant seems to me like the clear-cut choice of the player comp for Francis today.
I see what you're saying. And yes, that to me is a solid, that is a solid comparison in the climate of today's NBA, right? That's to me going to be the closest thing. A one of a kind, a unicorn style at that position. I completely am there with you on that level. So at least now we got two maybe that we can kind of throw in there. But it all starts with Steve Francis, man. And I really just wish, man, he, things played out a lot better for him. The circumstances played out a lot better for him. We probably would have seen a lot more of what Steve Francis could offer. And he could probably have been one of those dudes that changed the landscape about what other organizations would have been looking for in the style of guard play that they were asking or they were searching for through the draft. So, but man, you just yam on cats, or he was, out in the open transition break and stuff like that. And I can't remember, was he in the part of the slam dunk contest?
Yeah, he finished second to, he finished second to Vince Carter one year. Vince Carter.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, people, y'all check the, go back on the archives, man. Check the YouTube reels. You know what I'm saying? Stevie Francis was a monster. You know what I'm saying? And I'm glad that he did have his time and his opportunity, that we got a chance to see him do his thing in the NBA, bro.
Yeah, for sure. 21 points per game, 7 assists 1 year, almost 6 rebounds, like those are really, really good numbers. A 3-time All-Star, tied Elton Brand for Rookie of the Year in his first year coming out of Maryland. he was on the way, man. I wish the mental stuff and the off the court stuff didn't impact his ability to play, because it just didn't work out. And he had injuries as well too towards the latter part of his career.
And he did it in wearing or donning one of the ugliest uniforms during that time. Those Rockets uniforms were not pretty, bro. They were not. They were not. No disrespect to Houston Rockets fans. Listen, I'm just saying, that color scheme, I know you struggle with it at times, but the unis that Francis had to wear, man, it were not helping him whatsoever, bro.
Yeah. Well, interesting tidbit, before we wrap here too. I was looking at, he ended up on the Knicks. He had the one really full year in Orlando where he played well, but then fell out with Coach Brian Hill at the time. Got traded to New York. That Knicks team there's a lot of names on it. And when you go back and, look at it, Francis was there with Stephon Marbury, Nate Robinson at one point, Quentin Richardson, the ghost, if you will, of Penny Hardaway was on that team. Young Trevor Ariza, Matt Barnes, Jamal Crawford. That Knicks team, like name-wise, in terms of basketball lore, was loaded. They just,
if the peaks of their powers were there at the same time, that would have been that would have been their chance to go to a finals.
Jalen Rose was on that team, in the twilight of his career too. I don't remember Mo Taylor. Udoka was on that team. Like, it's that Knicks team, I think it was 05, 06.
Was it a 15-man roster or was it a 21-man roster? Like, they had every damn all-star
they
on
clearly
that.
had injuries, right? And so forth. And some guys came in, middle of the season, so forth. But when you look at it, looking at Basketball Reference, Channing Frye, like the team had a lot of guys on that, man. So, but shout out to Steve Francis, man. Really an exciting player. And you had to be there, I think, when he was rocking out, man, because he was truly electrifying on the basketball court. The handle, the ability to leap over guys on top of it too, but still get guys involved too. 6-7 assists a night. Just a great basketball player, man. I wish we would have had more time with him.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Look, man, great show altogether, right? Like, good to reminisce, good to talk about USA and women's basketball doing their thing. Hopefully they, by the time we probably will jump back into doing another show, they'll probably be on the podium hoisting gold, right? Like, that's what we're going to hope for. And again, we're just keeping our eye out for more, moves that are happening in the offseason for the NBA. Definitely, making things exciting for us to kind of, get back into the swing of things once we get past the Olympic stages, right?
Absolutely. So, shout out to Team USA, both men's and women's. Hope the 3-3 folks get their proverbial acts together. And by the time we record next, man, we'll have a lot to report on that too. And as we inch closer to what will be the start of training camp, the baseline is always ready to rock, man. So shout out to all our partners, especially our 19 Media Group family. Shout out to our auxiliary partners over at CLNS, and Prize Picks as well. And, continue to enjoy your summer. Cal and I will always be back here ready to rock.
Yeah, and probably by that time you'll have a little bit more grace.
Maybe it'll grow back in, man. Maybe it'll grow back in.
Probably by tomorrow. Anyway, man, we appreciate everybody hopping on board with us for the baseline this week. For the baseline, Cal, Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.